Hello and welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today on the show, we have the Emmy-nominated sound team behind Ripley. If you haven't checked out this limited series from Netflix, do yourself a favor and watch Ripley from creator Steven Zaillian. The series picked up a whopping 13 Emmy Award nominations, including Outstanding Limited Series, Sound Editing, and Sound Mixing. And a big reason the show is so tense and riveting is the work of the sound team that we're talking with today. Joining us is sound designer, co-supervising sound editor, and re-recording mixer Larry Zipf, co-supervising sound editor Michelle Feuser, re-recording mixer Michael Berry, and production sound mixer Maurizio Argentieri. Before we jump in, we are going to be discussing some spoilers big time. So if you haven't watched the show yet, please do so because we are going to be giving away some really big plot twists. Steven Zaillian, the writer and director of all 8 episodes, as well as the showrunner, uses sound design in a remarkably sophisticated way to tell his story. So that's where I started the conversation, by asking how much detail about the sound design Steven wrote into the scripts and how much was arrived at during post-production.
In the scripts, he definitely spends a lot of time describing events that are happening, and there's, describing the actions as well, whether it's, he's spelling out some specific about the sound or not. But often he is. And I think one of the things that really makes this show unique is how much space he allows for that to breathe in outside of, even a more traditional amount of dialogue or music. And, in episode 3, for instance, on the boat, I mean, I think it's really bold to do what he did and, take at the end of the day, it's a 20-minute sequence without any dialogue or without any music. And, 2 guys on a boat and one of them's dead. So, I think that takes a lot of confidence. And I think that Steve really, had envisioned that. Steve had brought me down to the picture editorial space to work out of there for maybe 4 or 5 months before we got into our pre-dubs. So that was a great opportunity for him to pop in occasionally, discuss scenes with me, and also for me to work more directly with the picture editors and, accommodate their requests of things that they were trying to achieve or Steve was looking for. And I would constantly feed them, fold downs from pre-dub groups, and they could take that and do what they wanted to. And we were also, all of us paying very close attention to the Avid track because I think Steve's comfort zone a lot is in the cutting room, the picture cutting room, which, I totally understand because, he has the freedom there to change anything. So, a lot of times we would provide some sound work. It would be modified there. We would, make sure that we followed, the work that they had done there in the picture cutting room.
But episode 3 in particular was not fully constructed until the last day of the mix almost. And it seemed like it was the last thing we were able to accomplish because they had to alter the picture so much. Maurizio, remind me, the boat scene in 3 was recorded in a pool, filmed in a pool. It wasn't on the open ocean.
Yeah, it was in an open space. I mean, in the garden, in the pool. Is like in a normal pool that you can find in someone house of garden house. And we have to fight with a lot of other offending noises like motorbikes and airplanes, a lot of airplanes, and we never had a complaint about all these offending elements by Steven. He really, with a lot of patience, wait until the sound was good to get the performance from the actors. This was the first time in my life that something like this happened, to work with someone that was really focused on get the performance, not just the sound, but get the performance, get the story, get the movie, and all the elements that you can watch and see and listen and hear on Ripley. It's really a matter of dedication. It's like you was there and hunting the right performance until he get it, and he really protected with all his effort.
I was just so fascinated when I watched the show about your work, because typically when we talk to production sound mixers, their main focus is just capturing dialogue on set as cleanly as possible, and capturing ambiances and textures and kind of the sound of the environments. It's sort of like, that's a nice to have, but it's secondary to capturing clean dialogue and getting the performance. But with a show like Ripley, with so these long sequences happening with no dialogue, I'm sure it made for a different focus for you. And so these textures and these environments became critically important. So can you talk a little bit about your strategy for capturing some of that material?
First of all, I'm not a conventional production sound mixer. Initially I work as a sound designer like those other guys here. And so I know what they do and what they need for doing their job, and I hope I give them the right stuff to perform in a right way. But anyway, as soon as you read, as I read the script, I totally understand that it wasn't a conventional project where you can go and just get the dialogue and that's it, because otherwise I'll be fired the next day. And so I study a lot the script during the location scouting, and then I set it up, my rigs and all the equipments that I need, because first of all it was a period show. So I put like a signature also in the texture of the sound, because I used tubes microphone preamplifier and large diaphragm microphone to get dialogue and give this sensation that you were there, also with this beautiful bouquet that coming from another period. And the black and white helped a lot to click those two elements together, and I think we achieved a pretty great results.
Dear Mr. Greenleaf, our fraud department has reported to me that it's their opinion the signature of January on your monthly trust remittance, number 8747, is invalid. Believing this may have escaped your notice, we hasten to inform you of the irregularity so that you may confirm our opinion that said check has been forged. Further, we have called this matter to the attention of Banca della Repubblica, Naples. Sincerely, Edward T. Kavanaugh, Esquire.
Also, I love the contrast, to build like a contrast with the space. So the dialogue was very hardly interpreted by tubes microphone preamplifier, but all the space that we built using, for example, immersive microphone rigs that I always use during the production to get the real ambient sounds, like the train stations, the banks. We shoot in a beautiful locations in Venice, for example, in Naples. All are historical. Marble was real, and the early reflection of those texture was really something. Is another character. And in the show, you will see that we go back and forth with the sound that is the imagination of what Tom have in his head. And we have to enhance all these elements and give the show all this beauty, that we went, for example, in the beautiful buildings in Venice. Why? There's no reason why I cannot get the true early reflection to put in the show. Also the bass. The bass was was totally recorded like, as a drum kit. I placed microphone everywhere, in the engine, in the exhaust, in the intake manifold, and there was an immersive rig inside the bass, and the sound was delivered in 5.0 format. And I think that you can feel that there is something,
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because my two favorite I guess sound design elements in the show are that bus that they take down from Naples, and also just that amazing elevator that was so finicky and always breaking down. But yeah, those two pieces were just standouts for me. Just really amazing, just full of texture and character.
Kudos to Maurizio and Larry for getting that elevator to be so intricate and special. And a lot of that's Larry's editing too, to make sure that the perspectives are right. Every angle has a new combination of sound results that Larry put together.
Well, to give some credit where it's due, when production wrapped, Steve was working. He went home to LA and was working there for, I don't know, a month or two, and he worked with a LA-based sound designer, Angelo Palazzo, and that episode 5 elevator was primarily what they focused on. So when I picked up work on the job later, I started with episode 1, and by the time we got into 5, I had inherited. The majority of the elevator work Angelo worked on with Steve when they wrapped production, so they did a fantastic job with that.
Just so our audience can kind of orient themselves as to the workflow here. Larry, you and Michael are listed as co-supervising sound editors. Could you talk a little bit about how you divide up the work and how you collaborate with each other?
Sure. I work primarily on the sound effects and sound design side. So I started working as far as the post team goes, sort of ahead of the rest of the crew, and was feeding the picture department and Steve sound effects and sound design for various scenes. And Steve would go through the episodes and prioritize areas where he really wanted to start to get the ball rolling with what the sound would be there. And that was primarily what I worked on. And Mish came on to work on the dialogue and ADR and the group side.
Well, you guys brought up episode 3, which is just stunning work. The episode is called Sommerso, and Larry and Misha, you are both nominated for outstanding sound editing for that episode. And the centerpiece, obviously, is the sequence on the boat that Michael Berry brought up a few minutes ago, and that we talked a little bit. But we've got some great clips that our friends at Netflix have provided for us. So I want to take a little bit of a deep dive on that sequence, and the conversation I want to start with you guys about that sequence is as they leave on the boat, they go out and there's a very tense conversation that's going to happen between Tom and Dickie on the boat.
Where are we headed? Does it matter?
I feel like in this sequence, when they leave, we can almost feel like a handoff from the score to the sound design in that moment when the boat stops. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of that feature of the collaboration between music and sound design, and also just that boat is a very interesting character in this sequence? And talk to me about the sound design of the boat.
So starting back at the sort of handoff between music and sound design, I think that the music in the show was used really effectively and spotted really effectively, and Jeff Russo's score is beautiful. And so I think the score is tailing out as we're looking over the Nero statue, and the boat is going off into the distance. And after that, we've sort of are left with the space to use all of the natural world and this boat observer that we kind of designed and concocted out of nothing, because the boat's not really making all those groans and commenting so much or on Tom's actions. So that was something we added. But likewise in other sort of more music heavy sequences, we would always make sure to leave space for the music to really carry those moments. And I thought that that was very effective. In terms of the sounds of the boat, we have some more vocal elements, which are the low groaning wood creaks, pitch wood creaks. We have some higher end creaking. We've got some engine ticks after the engine is cut from the back of the engine, and then we have various slapping water on the outside of the boat and sloshing on the inside of the boat, and a little bit of water from the gas cans occasionally, and wherever their action is in the boat. Between those, we tried to vary them because we're there for so long. We tried to really make that scene about having as much contrast as we could get away with between shots, in a way that wasn't distracting but helped move the narrative forward and can maintain your interest and not sort of get bored that you're in this one location.
It's a 20-minute sequence on the boat as Tom is trying to figure out kind of what to do, and there's no score on this, so it feels like every sound designer's kind of like dream of having an extended sequence with almost no dialogue, no music. But that can also kind of be a little terrifying, I can imagine, for you guys, because there's nothing to hide behind in a sequence like that, is there?
It is really a unique opportunity. I mean, you're not presented with that many. I haven't been presented with that many opportunities to have so much space and be given that long of a leash to really help carry interest through a show without the more traditional density of dialogue and music. So it was really exciting. But you also have this wonderful palette of sounds of the ocean, of the boat, a bit of action with the murder and the searching through the body, and again, back to Maurizio's track, all of the we did reinforce various moments with Foley, and that's certainly present, but we always used as much of the production as we could. And there's some really unique props in the show that were captured really beautifully and really have character, and I think that really brought something to the table.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because Maurizio, as I know from your previous comment that the boat sequence was shot in a pool with some pretty amazing visual effects to fill out the visual part of the world. But that sound in that sequence is so specific. And Larry, you mentioned one of the things that really stood out to me was that the editing and the way Steven shot these sequences, he really lets them breathe. So there's that very long, it's you can almost feel Tom thinking when he's kind of, exploring the body and pulling the things out and trying to figure out what do you see him thinking. And so I was just curious, Mauricio, what were you able to capture, in the pool and how much of that did make it into the final track and how much of that is post-constructed sound design?
Everything related to the actors was mostly production sound, and we were, just because was they were on a green screen, we were allowed to get closer with the microphones, and so in this way I can really reach a very good point of view to get their all the performance. I mean, the performance is not just the words that they are saying. It's just the movement, the breathing, all these small element about all the clothes. And also, just to give an example, there is another episode that is just sound. There is episode 5, for example, that in the apartment when there was another killing, and the apartment, for example, was in the studio, but and it was a fake apartment, but I was there while they were building the house in the soundstage, and I asked for everything to be real. And I uncoupled the floor in a way that all the footsteps doesn't sound, drummy, because the floor was suspended. So, and when you work on the suspended floor in the sound stage, the sound is not great. But this is another, bow that I have to give to the construction department. They don't, take me as the crazy man of the village, but they understood, because they read the script, that we need something different. So they build the floor with real woods and real, elements, and they did a fantastic job. So I just crank up the gain of the microphone amplifiers, and everything is there. I just get the space with an immersive rig or with a stereo rig. And usually what you do in a normal movie, footsteps sometimes get dumped, but I never dumped one single footstep in the entire show. Everything was real. Even the shoes, the Ferragamo's shoes, are real. So I never put a piece of, dumping material. And the footstep that you hear in the apartment and in the shoes are the real Ferragamo's footsteps.
Without a doubt, Steve Zaillian pays attention to every footstep and every breath and every movement.
That I gained is respect from these small elements at the beginning of the show. You are thinking that I'm crazy, but I'm not. And they can confirm that Steven is the kind of a person.
Well, the Ferragamos are a plot point. You have to. It has to be real.
Yeah, but it's not usual. You know what I mean. It's not usual to block the entire set made by a lot of people. Also, we were in the middle of pandemic. There was a lot of other people, and we asked for silence to shoot a sequence, a scene with just people walking in the frame, and do things with no one word. And in other situations, really, you can be considered like someone that is not, is not right. And so I received a lot of respect from Steven and the entire crew when they saw that the director start to respect what I was doing. They acting the same. So,
well, you brought up some things I want to come back to when we discuss episode 7. But before we leave Tom and the boat, Larry, you were talking about that the sequence modulates and gives you opportunities to do different things as it goes through. And I have to admit, I was just so captivated the first time I saw it. We really get the sense of like Tom is a sociopath, obviously, but he's not necessarily an evil mastermind. He's kind of figuring this out as he goes along. He drops the anchor, he falls out of the boat. He gets hit by the anchor. Like, it's actually there's some broadly comedic elements in that part of the sequence. And I feel like the sound design actually plays a part of that, and especially with the way it's cut, with the boat disappearing and then it roars through the frame. Then you realize it's just making big circles. Tell me a little bit about the sound design and your approach to that sequence.
Well, when he falls out of the boat, it's certain. Well, I guess just before he falls out of the boat, he's picked up this anchor and he goes to throw it overboard, and he's not really thought through what's going to happen with the rest of the rope that's behind it. And so that kind of kicks off. You have this fast rope unspooling. You've got then the rope sliding really quickly with this great zuzz across the gunnel. And then, Tom stumbles close up on his feet so we can see him trip and fall out of the boat and grab the throttle on his way out. And the joke, that joke afterwards, we see the boat go off and disappear. We're definitely taking liberties with that. And Steve was really tuned into like, what can we get away with here where it disappears, but it's not so broad, but that's definitely, I think it is supposed to be, there are supposed to be as a comedic shade to that. And, it was a lot of fun. And also in Tom's struggling to get back onto the boat, which apparently was pretty difficult in real life. And and I think that that it's really communicated with Tom's efforts and swearing and all of that.
Fuck.
Mish, also, you guys you did a ADR session with Andrew?
Yeah, that's right. I wanted to tag on to Maurizio's fantastic production sound. There were obviously some stuff where we needed to get closer to Tom with breaths. So we went into the ADR stage and we had basically Andrew chase himself for these whole 20 minutes. So there was one take all the way through. We picked a little bit up, but he was totally game. And so we went and recorded all of this. And then later on, Steve was very particular in them. Okay, this is that breath I want. This I don't. This one, let's move 3 frames to get really to the point and how, to get closer to Tom and
yeah, it's a remarkable sequence. Let's move on to episode 7, which is Macabre Entertainment. And Larry, you're nominated again. Michael, Maurizio, for outstanding sound mixing for this episode, which is just really fantastic. We got some great clips, but this is one of my favorite scenes in this episode. Tom visits the bank in Rome. He's practicing the signatures, and then he realizes that his passport photo is coming loose. So he aborts the mission to try to cash a check, and he leaves the bank. I was just struck by the remarkable sonic textures in that bank. And Mauricio, you talked about these recording on these locations, all that marble. It must have been a tremendous challenge for you to kind of be selective about what you were going to be picking up in that kind of environment.
Well, usually, in normal situation, you find as a production sound mixer to fight with some kind of element and to be, and hide this and be focused on the dialogue. In this way, when I cannot fight with those elements, so I have to be friends. So I build my relationship with the space, and instead of, send him away, I try to think I need them. So I just place another rig, an immersive rig, far away from the lines, for example, because I don't want to contaminate, the two focus elements, the line and the ambient microphone. But in the case where I don't have lines, because this sequence, except the moment that he goes to the person, to the bank employer, everything was live, and so there was it was a great chance, to start a good friendship with these elements and be part of the show. And so I didn't fight with them.
Larry, I want you and Misha to talk a little bit about the approach to the sound design on that particular sequence, because one of the things that stood out for me is, when you start to go into those close-ups on Tom's face, I feel like you guys are doing some really interesting work to communicate his subjective point of view. It's a very tense sequence. He's realizing that, he's in trouble. And it feels like this entire episode is really about like more and more pressure getting put on Tom. And I'm curious for you to talk about that idea of communicating his internal state and how you kind of alter the sonic landscape within that space to communicate that.
I guess the first thing is that this bank scene in a lot of ways is kind of like an echo of there's another bank scene in the first episode where Tom goes to try to cash a fraudulent check, and the check is examined, and it's not clear whether it's called out for being a fraud or not. But as he's observing the teller discuss it with the bank manager, he sort of also goes into this internal space and then decides that maybe it's too risky and leaves. So that scene definitely informed this scene in 7. And I think part of it is that you start with this bank environment that is, very live. We have the, beautiful production sound from Maurizio of this, really amazing location. And, there's a lot of activity. And as we get closer to Tom and we get more close-ups of the passport and, his other documents, we can start peeling the rest of that sound away and, be very present and very dry between the, production and some additional Foley that for the props that was done really well by JPEG. And I think it's the absence, we try to subtly remove the rest of that activity there, and that brings you closer to Tom and focuses you on, sort of his, interior space there.
I feel like the next sequence that we have a great clip from, you take that even further. So there's a sequence that happens pretty soon after that in the bank. Tom is he develops this habit of scanning the newspaper for news to see what's going on in his case. So he's at a sidewalk cafe and he's walking around. He visits a Caravaggio, and then he realizes he's being tailed, and then he kind of turns the tables and he follows the guy who's following him, and he realizes now that he's actually being followed by reporters and photographers.
That was a really fun sequence of this kind of cat and mouse between the journalist and Tom. And, it takes a little bit of time for Tom to realize he's being followed. But, the location for that in the show, this Carlson neighborhood in Palermo was, mentioned the other group voices where it's this Arabic neighborhood, within Palermo. So that gave us an opportunity to, basically bring a different flavor to the show than we'd had previously with group. And, you have these wonderful cobblestone streets, wet cobblestone streets. Most of the streets in the show are wet. And, wonderful production sound and enhanced with Foley where we needed it to be. By the time Tom goes and looks at the Caravaggio, we're able to go into Tom's head as he's sort of imagining the space of the painting again. And, that was definitely an idea of Steve's. I'm trying to remember the first Caravaggio that we see might be in episode 2, but, we would just look, basically get as much as we could visually out of the paintings, and then we'd go start researching the paintings and see what's this about, and whatever we could get away with subtly, it was fun to sort of just envelop the space with that sound. And also then you can have a nice contrast where Tom goes, okay, now I'm walking away, he's back in the neighborhood, and feels a little more dangerous to him. as this reporter follows when he knows he's being followed.
Yeah, it's fantastic work. Michael, can you talk a little bit about Dolby Atmos in the mix and how you guys use that to kind of give a sense of space to these amazing places?
He's made quite a few films, but he's not worked with Atmos very much. So it took a little bit of an introduction to what the possibilities were. And this is, near field Atmos. It's not full blown Atmos. So, you don't have as much leeway to play with stuff, but you have quite a bit of height at least. And I think once we introduced the construction of what we had in mind to him, he was open to the idea. A lot of it's just ambience and music, except for when the elevator is being used in that fashion, or the boat, just certain things. But generally speaking, we didn't fly a lot of things around the room because it wasn't that kind of piece. But I think we used it judiciously, and Steve was very happy at the end of the day.
And that's another thing that Steve was always interested in doing, where it made sense. But he would take score, and if at certain times, give it a little bit of a sense of the space that you were in. So you might be listening to some cue, and then you're in a large church, and then all of a sudden it's the score gets a little bit of that church wash. Or we're in Venice and we go under a bridge, and you get a little bit of this tunnel reverb, and that was always really fun. Stairwells as well at the Excelsior.
The difference between the kind of track that you guys were able to build and maybe some other kinds of tracks, it's about time and the ability to experiment and try things on the stage and get that level of detail and specificity. So what actually was the schedule on the did you get? I presume you didn't start with episode 1 and then go linearly through episode 8 and finish.
As far as the schedule, I think that we had. And on the sound effects side, I had the effects were somewhat pre-dubbed just by carrying them through this editorial process, and we're always cutting in a surround environment, and try to get ourselves started when we get into our official pre-dub time on a stage somewhere that's reasonably close. I think we each had a couple of days of pre-dub, and then we put the mix together in a per episode in a day. Mm-hmm. And we would review that with, Steve had a lot of other stuff going on. There's some additional photography of some pickups for inserts that they went back to Rome to do in June, which, that was a lot for him to be juggling at the same time that we were starting our mix. So Steve would review a lot of the pre-dub remotely. We would send him stereo track that he would review to picture on Pix, and we would get notes, work on those notes, send him another round. Sometimes we would send another round back to him. Other times we would get those notes and work on them and bring that work to the stage for the final. And I think when we got into the final, we spent on average maybe 4 days per episode.
Yeah, 4 to 5 days, something like that.
Yeah. We're working through them in a first pass, and then sort of by the time we finished that, we had a chance to review all the episodes over the December break, and we came back in and did some more work for another week or two. And because all of the episodes, we didn't really put any of them to bed. It wasn't like we finished one, now that's that's dead to us or whatever. They were all, you could go into any episode at any time. So which I think was really a strength of the became an asset to the track. Because we would refine something in one episode and go, wouldn't it be nice if that was if we could establish that even earlier, or be consistent and have that later. And so things were constantly developing across the show by working that way, and by having some more time to do that. How
much time did you have to prep the dialogue, Mish?
Well, I started in March. And Michael McManamy helped me to cut a couple episodes. And so we had 3 months before we started with the pre-dub. But at the same time, ADR kept starting. We needed to cue things, but then the strike happened. And so the ADR actually happened right before the final mix. We had like a window of 3 weeks to get everything in.
Mm-hmm. Mish, tell me a little bit about the Loop Group. I know that you guys ended up doing some region-specific vocal work with actors.
Yeah, it became pretty clear right away that we needed to do the loop group locally. So we had our ADR supervisor, Lydia Templenitzer, go out to Rome to Studio Care Sound, which was really, really great. And so she spent a week recording loop group. One day, actually, we did a little earlier, and then Steven was there at the loop group space. And so we got his input right away. But then we knew kind of what he wanted. We knew where he needed stuff. And so she went down there, and we had basically a day for each region. So we had the San Remo region, we had Naples and Amalfi Coast. We had Palermo at another day, and then the general stuff later on for Venice and these areas. And we did quite, there's a lot of loop in this show, and so we collected a lot of stuff. And then Larry went on for certain things when it pertained to the stairways to World Eyes, the group, to put them really in a space and then mix it in that way.
The group was really wonderful to have, because I sort of got to a place where, as an American, I have limited access to kind of the more midfield and near field Italian voices that at some stage you really sort of need. And so I was getting self-conscious about, repurposing certain things. And I was like, I can't wait to get some of this group. And it was really wonderful to have, and very well recorded, and the performances were great.
Yeah.
Lydia and Mish did a great job with that.
There's one specific scene that I want to ask you about before we wrap up. And it's again in that episode 7. And Tom, we talked about the fact that like he's getting more pressure. He's feeling more pressure. So he gets these fraud letters from the bank, and he realizes that everybody knows where he's staying at this hotel in Sicily. And so he leaves that, and then he kind of sneaks out, and he goes and checks into a much cheaper hotel. The contrast in the sonic environments between those two hotels, it struck me so powerfully. So Larry, can you talk a little bit about like that particular decision? What does it do to I think it's working on us on a sort of a maybe a subconscious level, but how do we feel about Tom because of the contrasting audio environments of this cheaper hotel that he checks into?
Yeah, I think there's some humor in that too, and it's sort of bringing us back to the SRO Tom starts off in New York, where we establish that there's people living basically behind every paper thin wall around him, and doing whatever. So we start off at the he ends up at the Savona, the first hotel where he's at the Palma. He's the nicer hotels. He's at the Palma. And, he sneaks down the stairwell, and, you're sort of in this kind of lush garden environment, and he gets into the taxi. And also I don't know if we mentioned this yet, but, not just the bus, but all the vehicles in the show that I had to work with, Maurizio recorded. So when I started working on the show, I was given this folder, and it was like, here's 19 or 20 period Italian vehicles. Oh, and here are the photos of how we mic'd everything, and you can see that they're all original engines. And so, that's why those all sound really good. So Tom gets in the taxi. He flees, and by the time we get to the Savona, which is the pension, the kind of lower rent space, the group really picks up there. And you also have, instead of the lush birds and the wind and trees, you've got some dogs, and you've got, pigeons and crows, and people argue, a lot of people arguing. And that was really fun. And because of that, the architecture of that space was so unique. We got to really go to town with reflections and treating the group to put it into that space. And, wherever we could make something in those places kind of more mysterious or weird, Steve always was, willing to explore that and, had fun with that.
Well, before I let you guys go, one final question. We love our friends at Netflix, but one thing that they do, they make it very remarkably easy for people to skip the end titles. And I feel like you guys had a little fun with that, maybe a little bit of an Easter egg. Can you talk about the sound design that you guys work into the end titles of each one of the episodes on this show?
Yeah, that was really a picture department thing. Mm-hmm. So they, Steve, I don't know, he might have been thinking about it for a while, but that happened, those were cut, during our final. And the picture editors, Dave Rogers and Josh Lee, and probably the first assistant Lily as well worked to they started with stems that we had from the future episodes, from the episode ahead, and sort of built an arc throughout the end credit sequence using those sounds and also cutting some additional sound. And I thought they did a beautiful job with that. And it is kind of a crime, it feels like, when you have that skip ahead.
I think part of that motivation was, I don't want to read into his mind too much, but was Steve trying to use that as a way of people paying attention to the end credit music.
Gentlemen, it was a great pleasure talking with you about Ripley. The work is just fantastic. Congratulations on your well-deserved Emmy nominations, and I'm looking forward to season 2. I hope at some point.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, too.
Many thanks to Larry, Michel, Michael, and Maurizio for joining us on the podcast today. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Netflix for helping put that conversation together and providing us with those fantastic clips to discuss. Please be sure to check out Ripley, now streaming in Dolby Atmos, and also worth mentioning the incredible black and white cinematography. Looks gorgeous in Dolby Vision on Netflix. We will have links to the show, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you're subscribed to us, Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.